Good morning, everyone. We just got back from Taupo, and so we're having a bit of trouble getting everything to you guys. We went up to Auckland to get Lydia's passport, and then we made it back about as far as we could to Taupo, and now we finally made it back to our place. And so, yeah, we've got a couple new students in the class. I think Tessa is going to be joining us, and even though Malou's not a new student, she wasn't able to um, be in class with us last time, and so I'm just recording what we covered in class last time when we were all together, and you all can use this as you see fit. Like I said in class, we won't be tested over pronunciation, but the reason that we are going to cover pronunciation is because it'll help us as we're going through the Greek language and discussing things with one another to kind of be on the same page with how to say certain things. And so it will be pretty helpful. And so you all should have been studying the Greek alphabet to learn that. And now just looking at pronunciation I think will be helpful. The vowels in Greek, there's more than there are in English. Alpha, epsilon, eta, iota, omicron, upsilon, and omega. And so what we'll do now is just look at how these are pronounced. Unlike English, where the letter A, can have multiple pronunciations, in Greek, each of these only has one pronunciation. So in some ways that's pretty easy. Alpha makes the short A sound A, epsilon, eta, A. Iota sometimes is short, I, or is long, E. And you'll see that in different words that we look at together. And just listen to how I pronounce things. You'll get a hang of it and which way to use the iota. Omicron is always a short O sound, but it sounds almost identical to alpha, so we just say ah. Upsilon is oo, like ooh, that's gross, ooh. And omega is O, O. So the long O sound is never used with an omicron, even though sometimes when we see it, that's our first tendency is to try to do the long O sound. And the omicron is always ah, and the omega is always O. What I thought we'd do now is taking the short A sound that comes with the alpha, we would put it at the end of each of the consonants in the Greek alphabet and go through and see what they would say. So looking at these consonants, we have beta, gamma, delta, zeta, theta, kappa, and lambda. And if we were to go through and how these sound, it would be something like ba, ga, da, za, tha, ka, la. And so when we see those, that is basically the only sound they can make. In the English alphabet, the letter C, for instance, can make the S sound or the hard K sound or different things like that. But fortunately in Greek, when we study something, they are generally making the same sound always. And so there's a little bit more consistency, which helps us to learn a little bit more quickly than someone trying to learn English as a second language. Let's see if we can pronounce these words. The first one is baptisma, baptisma. And as we go through this, you can take it at your own pace and say, okay, well, how do these words come together like this? Well, we see beta, alpha, p. A lot of times this is called pi, like pi r square or 3.14. But if we're going to pronounce things consistently, this would be p. So beta, alpha, p, tau, iota, sigma, mu, alpha, baptisma. And you can already guess that that is baptism. The next one, gune, gune. Next, diakonos, diakonos. Notice that this is not diakonos or diakonos, that the omicron makes the short O sound. Next is zelos, zelos. Next, thronos. The theta has two English sounds, the T and the H, thronos. Next is klepto, klepto. Then the last is lazaros, lazaros. You can hardly tell a difference between the alpha sound and the omicron sound. On the left side of the screen are the maybe transliterations of how these things would be pronounced. and on the right side of the screen are the translations. And so as you looked at some of these, some of them aren't as clear, like gune, that is the word for woman, but the majority of the rest of them have something to do with English. And so as we study the Greek language, you'll see a lot of English cognates. A cognate is a word that is the same or very similar in one language to the next. And so when we study those, it'll be easy when we learn our vocabulary. Baptisma, baptism. Diakonos, deacon. Zelos, zeal. Thronos, throne. Klepto, you might have heard of a klepto, or a person who is called a kleptomaniac, and that's someone who enjoys stealing. And then Lazarus. Let's go to the next few consonants that we see in the Greek alphabet. Mu, nu, xi, pi, rho, sigma, and tau. And when we take those consonants and add the letter alpha to the end of them, we have something that sounds like ma, na, xa. Now the xi is a strange letter. It I guess is most similar to the English x, but it comes with that whole ek sound at the beginning, eksa, so xa, and especially when we see it in the middle of the word, it holds that pronunciation. P makes the sound just the letter P, pa. Even though it looks like a lowercase p in the English language, it is actually a rho, the next letter. So the rho makes the R sound, ra. There's going to be a few letters in the Greek alphabet that you're learning that will look like English letters. They might be a bit difficult. When you see the nu, for instance, so the letter that makes the N sound, it looks like a lowercase English V. So we need to be careful that, okay, that's not a V, actually, that is a nu. When you see the mu, the letter that makes the M sound, you might say, okay, that looks like a U. There's a weird thing on the front, but it looks like a U. Well, actually, that makes the M sound. And so some of these we'll need to be familiar with. After Ra, or rho alpha, we have sigma alpha, which makes the sa sound. Sigma has two different ways. Well, we'll get to that. So sigma alpha makes the sa sound, and tau alpha, I think this one's pretty easy. It looks like a T, and that's what it does. It sounds like a T as well. And so taking those letters, let's look at these words. Martha. I think you could probably guess what that means. Martha. The next one, Nathan. Nathan. Remember the alpha does not make different sounds as the A in English does. It's always a short A. Next is xenos. Xenos. Notice that the xi still takes that strange way of pronunciation. The next word, prophetes. So here's the P and the rho working together makes the PR sound, prophetes. Next word, rabbi. Rabbi. Next, sabaton. Sabaton. And then last, titos. Titos. Maybe the pronunciation transliterated is on the left side, and then the translation is on the right. You have Martha, Nathan. Xenos, you might have heard someone who is xenophobic. That's someone who's afraid of strangers or afraid of foreigners. And so xenos is a stranger. Prophetes, you might have guessed, is prophet. Rabbi is rabbi. That's a transliteration from the Jewish language. Sabaton, Sabbath, and Titos is Titus. And here's the end of the alphabet, but they are also, they take more than one English letter and put them together in the sound that they make. So we have phi, ki, and psi. Phi, ki, and psi. The phi with an alpha makes a sound like fa. The ki and the alpha sometimes has a sound made in the throat, like at the end of the composer's name, Bach. A lot of people would say Bach and say that in the back of their throat. In general, though, as we're pronouncing Greek, probably be saying things so quickly that you don't get as much from the throat, and it just really comes from a K sound. So ka, fa, ka, and then the ka. So we would say a word like pseudonym. And we know a pseudonym is a false name. But in that pronunciation, we don't say the P sound that's at the beginning, the first letter of that word. We just say pseudonym, just the S. But in Greek, we get this PS, psa, and you do pronounce the P and the S sound. And so looking at those, we have 3 words. Philippos, so phi makes Philippos, phi, iota, lambda, iota, p, omicron, sigma. Notice in the second word that sigma can be in the middle of the word. This is Christos. And the first sigma that we see looks like an omicron with a line on top, maybe the way that we would draw a cursive S. Then the last sigma looks more like an S. These are how the letters look. The first one is what a sigma looks like at the beginning or the middle of the word, and the last one is what a sigma looks like at the end of a word. So the first word is Philippos, second is Christos, and the third is Psalmos. And you might have guessed these are Philip, Christ, and Psalm. As we're pronouncing, when we see 2 gammas together, this is called a gamma nasal. What that means is it makes this kind of NG sound that might to some sound like it's coming from the nose. But if you're familiar with the Samoan language, I think whenever you pronounce the G, there's kind of an N in front of that. Like in Jay and Chantel's last name, Pahetongia. There's not actually an N in the spelling, but it sounds like there's an N in the pronunciation because of the G. Well, in the Greek language, anytime there's 2 gammas together, we get an NG. And so this word that we're looking at is angelos. We might be tempted to say agalos and just pronounce that G twice, but really this is angelos, and we could guess that that means angel. So if we were to transliterate this to English, it might be something like A-N-G-E-L-O-S, angelos. And so we remember those 2 G's make an NG, or those 2 gammas make an NG sound. We mentioned this before, at the beginning or middle of a word, a sigma looks like how we would draw a cursive S, and at the end of the word it looks similar to how we would draw a regular S. These are called diphthongs. I made the joke with the class, and I don't want to deprive you guys of my excellent humor. That a diphthong is not a piece of low-riding Greek underwear. It's actually two vowels that come together to make a distinct sound. Terrible joke, I know, but I couldn't pass it up because someone else would have said it. And so when we look at these vowels that come together, they make a separate sound than any vowel does on their own. In English, we might think of the letter A, for instance, and in the word plate, P-L-A-T-E, the word A, or the letter A makes a long A sound. But then we might say the word cat, C-A-T, and then it makes an A sound. And then in other places like watch, W-A-T-C-H, it makes an ah sound. And for people learning English as a second language, it's kind of a nightmare thinking, man, this letter A can actually make a lot of different sounds. But in Greek, like we mentioned before, the vowels only make the one sound. Other than iota, and it depends on where it is in the sentence. But generally, the vowels just make the one sound. But if you want to make other sounds, you would use a diphthong. You would see this in the word as a pronunciation. All right, let's have a look at how these are pronounced. Alpha iota makes the I sound. So if you see alpha iota, it's I. Epsilon iota makes the A sound, like in the word 8. E-I-G-H-T. The E-I makes the A sound. It's the same with Greek. Epsilon iota, A. Omicron iota is oi, kind of like you would see in the word oil, O-I-L. So Omicron iota, oi. Alpha upsilon We'd see that similar in the Latin term for gold. We get that in augment or augmentation or auxiliary, something like that. It's very similar in Greek, but it's more of an ow, O-W, ow, like that hurt, ow. Omicron, upsilon, ooh, ooh. Upsilon iota, there's one word that we see very commonly that's called weos, which is the Greek term for son. We see that a lot, obviously, in reference to Jesus, being the Son of God, the weos. And so when we look at this, upsilon iota makes the we sound, and then we see at the end epsilon upsilon or eta upsilon, and this makes the u sound. So if that is there, you'd pronounce that u. So if we were to go through these, they would sound like this: I, a, oi, ow, oo, we, and you. These next words kind of are showing us what a diphthong would sound like in a sentence. So I'll pronounce these words in the middle, and what's on the left is kind of an English pronunciation guide, and what's on the right is the translation. Aiguptos, Aiguptos is Egypt. Icone, acone, acone, because the E-I makes the A sound. Acone is an icon or an idol. Oinos, oinos is wine. Augustos, Augustos. So we have two diphthongs in this, the alpha upsilon at the beginning, which makes the ow, and the omicron upsilon, which makes the oo. So Augustos is Augustus, Caesar. Urios, urios. I want us to take note in this word that at the end of the word there's an iota alpha together. Anytime that we see two vowels together that are not in this chart that I gave you, so as we see iota alpha are not together in that order, those vowels they retain their original pronunciation, but they're just said separately. So this word actually has 3 syllables: u, ri, os. Generally, when you look at a Greek word, the amount of syllables that will be there will be based on how many vowels or diphthongs there are. So if we were to look at the top word, aiguptos, we have a diphthong, which counts as number 1, which is alpha iota. Number 2 would be the upsilon. Number 3 would be the omicron at the end. So counting vowels or diphthongs, if we count how many there are in a word, that'll tell us how many syllables are in each word. So we counted 3, and that's how that word will come across: aiguptos. If we go down to the second to last, we have this word weos. And though it looks like, okay, there's 3 different vowels, actually the first 2 vowels are forming together to make that we diphthong, and the omicron stays by itself, so it's a 2-syllable word, weos. I'll give you a challenge, the last one. Let's count how many diphthongs or syllables we see. Sorry, diphthongs or vowels we see to figure out how many syllables there will be in this word. So the first is EU, epsilon, upsilon, which makes the U sound. Then there's an alpha. Then there's an iota. Then there's another iota and an alpha. And we remember that that's not actually a diphthong, that's just 2 vowels next to each other. So this word is Eucharistia. Eucharistia. So there are 5 syllables because we counted 5 vowels and diphthongs. And this is the word for Eucharist. The Greek Orthodox and Roman Catholic Church still use this word for the Lord's Supper. But when we see that in the Greek New Testament, the word just means thanksgiving. Eucharistia. As far as you know, have you seen a letter in the Greek alphabet that makes an H sound? I'll go ahead and answer that. We haven't. We haven't actually seen a letter that makes the H sound because there is no letter that makes the H sound. And if anyone's going through the transliteration of John 1 through 3 that I sent out the email for, there's actually no transliteration for the W sound either. I thought about that a little bit later after I realized in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. There's a lot of W sounds, but for you guys just to recognize that, okay, well, some of the letters in English don't correspond to a Greek letter. Well, that's fine. But there is a way in the Greek alphabet to make the H sound, but it's not with a rough breathing mark. And what this looks like is a backwards comma that goes on top of a vowel at the beginning of the word. Now, realize we're going to be looking at the rough breathing mark and the smooth breathing mark, and the only time we will see these is when there is a vowel at the beginning of the word. We looked at our vowels earlier, and so as we look at this, the rough breathing mark makes an H sound. And so let's pronounce these words together. Hamartia, hamartia. Hippos, hippos. Herodes, herodes. Notice I'm not saying amartia or ippos or aerodes, but I'm putting the H sound at the beginning because the rough breathing mark tells me to. Hamartia means sin. Hippos, if you've heard of the word hippopotamus, hippopotamus means river horse. And hippos is the Greek word for horse. The Greeks had a place called the hippodrome, which is a place where they would do horse racing. And then Herodes, if you were to take off the last syllable of that, Herod. Similar to Herod that we would see in the New Testament, the word Herod, or the individual Herod. Okay, and so we have the rough breathing mark at the beginning of a word whenever there's a vowel that tells us to make the H sound. If it doesn't make an H sound, but there's still a vowel at the beginning of a word, you get the smooth breathing mark, which is just the other way turned around, a comma, or some would say a quotation mark, that goes in front of the word or on top of the first letter that doesn't get pronounced at all. It's just telling us there's a vowel in the first spot, in the first letter of the word. And so this first one, the reason why the smooth breathing mark, instead of being on top of the iota, is because this iota is capitalized, because this is the name for Jesus. Iesus. Iesus. Now, iota and eta going together don't make a diphthong, so we pronounce them separately. Iota, eta, Iesus. But then omicron, upsilon do make a diphthong, so we pronounce them together. Next, apostolos. Apostolos. You're probably familiar with that, apostle. But this smooth breathing mark does not make an H sound, so it's not hapostolos or Iesus, but Iesus and apostolos. And then the last is basically a word that expresses surprise, kind of like we would in English if we said "oh," O-H, with maybe an exclamation mark. That's basically how you say that word, "oh." It's just an omega with a smooth breathing mark on top of it. "Oh." We're not saying "ho," just "oh" because of the smooth breathing mark. Did you notice that the breathing marks are used only when a vowel begins a word? You won't see them over vowels in the middle of a word. You won't see them ever with consonants. You will only see them with a vowel that happens to be at the beginning of the word. You might see a tiny iota hanging out under a vowel like this, and this word is hora. The reason I pronounce it that way, there's a rough breathing mark, and it makes the H sound. Then we have the long O of the omega, a rho, and then an alpha. And then there's a small iota. It's called an iota subscript, and that'll be important when we get into grammar, but at this point, this does not affect pronunciation. So this would not be horai, but hora. This is the Greek word for hour, H-O-U-R. So as we are reading and going through these, once you've learned these pronunciation rules, you can pick up the Greek New Testament and start reading. You might not know a word of what you're saying, but you could sound like you do. And so, it's I guess that could be helpful. This next word is syllabification, and this is very important. You might have heard the joke before that someone is wanting to put the emphasis on the wrong syllable. Well, you can really tell when somebody's learning English, because one of the signs of someone who is not yet mastered the English language, they're starting to put the emphasis on the wrong syllable. Especially, I've heard a lot of Asian people that are learning English, and not to make fun of them or anything. I imagine if I was learning one of their languages, I would sound just ridiculous. But a lot of times, people put the wrong emphasis on the wrong syllable. And so anytime we see these marks that are at the bottom of the screen, it doesn't really matter the way that they look, but it does matter that they are showing this is where the emphasis sits in this word. Whenever they are included, there's three options there. The two in the middle, and then the one on the bottom right also has a rough breathing mark or a smooth breathing mark. So that is important. It does tell us if there's an H sound at the beginning of the word. But you will see marks like this to tell us where the emphasis is in the word. I want you to do this exercise. Maybe you can stop or pause the video and try it. But in these English words, the emphasis goes with the underlined vowel. Information, dictionary, telephone. We don't say information or dictionary or telephone because we know where the emphasis goes on these words. And as native English speakers, we don't even think about this. It's just incredibly natural. We've heard these words said over and over again. But I want you to try to put the wrong emphasis, or the emphasis on the wrong syllable in these words. It's actually kind of funny when you hear somebody trying to do that. So that's kind of what we have to be paying attention to in the Greek language, even though we're so familiar with it in English. If we were to look at these words, some of them might be familiar to you. Agape, agape. So there's a smooth breathing mark. I don't pronounce an H. And then the emphasis, the emphatic mark, is over the second alpha, which tells me that this isn't agape or agape. This is agape. And this is the word for love. Let's look at the next word, the word for Jesus, Iesus. Iesus. The emphasis goes on the U. Since that is a diphthong, the entire diphthong gets the emphasis. But I'm not saying Iesus or Iesus. I'm saying Iesus. The next word, Abraham. Abraham. This is the name for Abraham. And notice there's no H sound in Greek other than at the beginning of a word with a vowel if there's a rough breathing mark. And so Abraham. Timotheos. Timotheos is Timothy. And I know I'm probably sounding a little bit silly putting so much emphasis on it, but I'm doing so just to make the point of this is how the word is pronounced. And fortunately, it shows us where the emphasis comes is based on where that pronunciation mark goes. Oinos. Oinos. Now, what we see in this word oinos is a smooth breathing mark, so it doesn't get an H, it doesn't get pronounced, but it does tell us that the emphasis goes on the first syllable. The little tilde that's above that you might see in the Spanish language or other languages tells us this is the syllable, the emphasis goes on the first syllable, oinos, and that's the Greek word for wine. Then the last word, we have a rough breathing mark, so we will pronounce that with an H, and it also tells us that the pronunciation, the first syllable gets the emphasis, so hagios, hagios. And hagios means holy or saint. And that's what the word saint means, is a holy person. And so going through these things, that's basically the end of pronunciation. And there will be some practice. And I'll probably correct you guys in class when you pronounce things wrong, but it's not, not a big deal. We're all learning this together. But we're going to be able to pronounce the Greek alphabet so that people around in the world, this is generally the pronunciation that is used. Now, this isn't exactly the same as modern Greek pronunciation. It's definitely not the same as classical Greek, like Plato or Aristotle or any of those guys. But basically, this is how Koine Greek is understood throughout the world whenever people are speaking a word that's in the Greek New Testament. Now, generally, we understand that the Greek New Testament, the Greek of this time period, is a dead language. Modern Greek is different. And so generally, you're not going to be speaking this to people, you'll be reading it. But whenever you're saying these words in association with the Greek class or pronouncing them, see, I can't even pronounce English sometimes, pronouncing them in studying them, then it will be helpful that you have kind of a standard way of saying them that other people will understand. Now you can't say it's all Greek to me anymore because now you know Greek. I just thought that was a funny meme. But as we learn, we'll be able to say that more and more. This is another thing we went over in class is remembering English. And what's funny is there's a lot of people in school that speak English that actually fail English because they don't know about grammar, they don't know about syntax, all these other things that go along with the English language we just kind of assume because we've heard people speak English. It's a lot different than writing English or diagramming sentences and all these things. I was in school with quite a few Mexican people that lived growing up in Texas, and it was surprising that a lot of them failed Spanish, even though they speak Spanish. But it's the same with, I guess, American people or Kiwis failing English. And so what we need to do is to remember some things in the English language. Sorry if you can hear our washing machine going, it kind of sounds like a jet engine, but hopefully you can still hear me over that. Here are some aspects of the English language we need to remember because I'll be using these terms to describe certain things in Greek, starting tonight in our class. Number. In English, this is very easy to distinguish singular and plural. Generally, we put an S whenever something is plural. There are a few exceptions to that. Child, if you wanted to make the word child plural, you add an R-E-N to say children. But when we talk about number, we're talking about singular or plural, and that's important to know. Person. First person, second person, third person, singular, or first person, second person, third person, plural. In English, this is always this, and this is a very important diagram to know, especially in Greek, because we be looking through something and I'll say, what person is this? And it's important to know if something is second person or first person, because first person is I, second person is you, third person is he, she, or it, and those are all singular. And then in the plural, first person is we, second is you guys, or in the south of the United States they would say y'all, or you plural, and then third is they. Gender. Generally in English, only pronouns take gender. Most English words do not indicate gender, but if you were to get into a Latin-based language, like Italian or Spanish, generally all the nouns have a built-in gender. That's how Greek is as well. And so in this example in English, the pronouns indicate gender. He is masculine, it is neuter or neutral, and her is feminine. Well, in Greek, you'll see a word, sin, for instance, hamartia, is a feminine noun. That doesn't mean there's anything feminine about sin. You know, men do it too. But then hamartolos is the noun for sinner, and it's actually masculine. And so when we learn new words, we have to also remember their gender, which is very different than English. Tense. Present tense, past tense, perfect tense, future tense. There's more tenses than that in English, but just as an example, when was this happening, basically, is what tense asks us. Present, I kick. It's happening right now. Past, happening in the past. Perfect is generally something that happened in the past, but maybe still affects the present. So you say, I have kicked, or I have done something. And then future, will. Voice. Active and passive voice. Is it me who's doing the kicking, or is it me who's getting kicked? That's very important for us to be able to understand in English, and that's going to be very important in Greek as well. Active and passive voice. Case. In English, we generally have the subjective, objective, and possessive. And it's the same sentence 3 times. The subjective case is the subject of the sentence, which would be he. Objective, what is the direct object or indirect object? Computer. And possessive, this is my computer. In Greek, there is no subjective, objective, possessive case. There's different names, but I do want us to be familiar with, okay, how do we figure out what the case of the sentence is? And in Greek, every single Greek word will tell you what case it's in based on its ending. So in some ways, Greek is a little bit easier to learn as a second language than English would be. Parts of speech. These are going to be very important. If you don't know these, you've got to learn them. A noun is a person, place, or thing. We'll be using these over and over again, heaps, during the Greek lessons. An adjective, something that describes a noun or an adjective. An adverb, something that describes a verb. There's not actually adverbs in the Greek language, but there are adjectives that will function as adverbs. There are prepositions, a time or location relationship between two words. So you could say, the boy came to the school before the other boy. And before would be your preposition that deals with time. You might say the cat is on the table, and then on would be your preposition that dealt with location. Parts of speech, you have the subject, which is the subject of the verb, the person who's doing the action. The predicate is the verb and everything following. And then we have in English the definite article and the indefinite article. In Greek, there is no indefinite article, but there is a definite article, which tells us this is the boy, this is the one. It defines what we're looking for. Or indefinite, this is a boy. It just is, in general, this is a boy, or something like that. So it's not very definite. If we were to look at this sentence, I'll give you a few minutes to think about it. Maybe not minutes, I'll give you a few seconds to think about it. A brown fox quickly ran through the field. There is one indefinite article, and there's one definite article. Can you identify them? That's right. I don't know, I feel like it's funny to be teaching in class and not being able to talk to you. But the indefinite article is a, and the definite article is the. Okay, there is one adjective. That's right, it's brown. There are two nouns. Good job. It's fox and field. And then there is one adverb. That's right, quickly is the adverb. Generally in English you can see the adverb by an ly. The preposition is through, and the object of the preposition is the field. And so we can just break apart a little silly sentence like this for parts of speech, and we'll be doing that in Greek. And the more we understand this in English, the better we'll understand it in Greek. Now, if you've ever seen Men in Black, they have this little device that helps you forget what it is that you've learned. Now, all those rules and things you've learned in English, I want you to forget those, but I do want you to remember the words that we've just talked about: number and gender and case and tense and voice and all those parts of speech, because we're going to work on those a lot in Greek. Greek we'll get into the Greek language on Thursday night, which is tonight, and I hope this has been helpful for you all. I've got to figure out how to end the video with this program. Let's see. Well, you can turn it off. It takes me a while to figure out how to end it.